Let's talk Tanya for the 19th of Teves of a leap year. In today's Tanya, we begin chapter 12. The larger topic we're talking about is the struggle between the godly soul and the animal soul. And up until this point, in the last two chapters, we've discussed two possible outcomes. One of them obviously amazing, which is at tzaddik, which is when the godly soul gains an advantage, a significant advantage over the animal soul. The second outcome, not so good, we talked about that in the last chapter, is the rasha, when the godly soul somehow is able to overpower and compromise the godly soul. And in today's chapter, we're going to talk about the third possible outcome, which, as we will find out in next chapter, or actually in chapter 14, we'll find out this is our ultimate aspiration, or this is something which we should be aspiring for, because that is the expectation of every single person. What is the third possible outcome? The third possible outcome is a stalemate, where the godly soul and the animal soul, neither one of them gains an advantage over the other one. Neither one of them manages to compromise the other one. They're both operating at full power. And what does that result in practically? Practically, that results in someone who in machshava dibur ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action, meaning in their garments and their behaviors, they are perfect. Their actions and their thoughts and their speech is totally consistent with the desires of the godly soul. These are people who are, to them, if you were to observe them, they look perfect. Now, inside, they're not perfect. Inside, there's an animal soul which is raging, because the animal soul's at full power. But in terms of practically speaking, these are perfect people. So the obvious question is, if the godly soul and the animal soul, both of them are at full force, why is the result a person who is perfect in their behavior, in their garments? And that's something we're going to address, God willing, in the coming days in Tanya. But for now, this is the reality. The reality is that when we have that case, when we have that situation, that kind of stalemate, that is what the result is. And the way the Alter Rebbe describes it very interestingly is, he says that the Beinoni, because that is the third possible outcome, is known as the Beini, the Beinoni, the intermediate, the one who's between the tzaddik and the rasha. The Beinoni is someone who is Le'avar aveira miyamav v'lo yaver, someone who has never sinned in his life and never will sin. Now, and both of those statements are puzzling. What does it mean that the Beinoni is someone who has never sinned? And if you sin once, you can never become a Beinoni? Actually, even if you sin, you can become a tzaddik eventually. What does that mean? And also the second part of the statement, that a Beinoni is someone who never will sin. We all have free choice. Just because a person right now is in a state where they're not sinning, how does that indicate what will be in the future? But the Alter Rebbe over here is telling us, giving us to understand what is the state of the Beinoni. The state of the Beinoni is one in which it's an internal state. Again, it manifests itself in perfect behavior, but it's an internal state. It's a state where the godly soul and the animal soul are both, as we mentioned, at full force. And that is what we're trying to achieve, is that state, that internal equilibrium or balance. Now, a person who has sinned before, the problem isn't that they've sinned in the past. The problem is that every time we sin, we become weak in that area. The godly soul becomes weak. That's an advantage for the animal soul, as we all know. An area in which we failed once before, we're much more susceptible to failing there again. And if your godly soul has been weakened, then you're a rasha, you're not a Beinoni. So to be a Beinoni means someone you have to, yes, possibly you have sinned, but at this present moment, that sin doesn't exist. You have wiped it away. You've worked on yourself to the point where you're no longer weakened by that sin, to the point that when someone looks at you, or obviously we're talking about the spiritual eyes, there is no sin, there is no residue, nothing left over from that sin, because the godly soul is at full strength. And in this current state, it's not possible that you should sin. When you're in that state of Beinoni, you will never sin, regardless of the temptation, regardless of the test. Now, will you sin? Maybe. Why? Because maybe tomorrow you won't be a Beinoni. You'll lose that status. Somehow or other, your animal soul will gain some sort of advantage over your godly soul. But a Beinoni can't sin. A Beinoni can never sin. A Beinoni will never sin. And if this state persists, that person will never sin. So the Alter Rebbe is giving a description of what this outcome is. Again, animal soul, godly soul, both at full force. Neither has been compromised in any which way, and for whatever reason, which we have to find out, that results in perfect behavior in thought, speech, and action. In tomorrow's Tanya, we're going to find out that even the Beinoni, there are times, and we'll find out when that is tomorrow, there are times when the godly soul does gain some sort of actual advantage over the animal soul, an internal advantage. When is the time and what is the implication of that? We'll find that out in tomorrow's Let's Talk Tanya.